Independent editorial defense analysis focused on Australia's strategic environment.
The allocation of 3.9 billion Australian dollars to the development of the Osborne submarine construction yard marks a distinct transition. It shifts the AUKUS program from a diplomatic framework into an irreversible industrial reality. Until this financial commitment, the trilateral agreement existed largely as a set of political promises and technology-sharing protocols. It was capable of being paused or redirected with minimal sunk costs. But the mobilization of capital for physical infrastructure, specifically for the groundworks required to support nuclear propulsion technology, fundamentally alters the calculus for Canberra. It signals that the government has moved past the point of strategic optionality. The primary variable is no longer if the capability will be pursued. Instead, the question becomes whether the national industrial base can metabolize the complexity required to deliver it. This investment does not purchase a single hull or a single reactor. Rather, it buys the entry ticket to a nuclear industrial tier that Australia has historically avoided. Consider the scope of the infrastructure project at Osborne. It suggests a complete reordering of the South Australian industrial landscape. By expanding the site to roughly 3 times the size of the existing yard used for the Collins class, the project acknowledges the sheer spatial and technical demands of nuclear submarine construction. Unlike conventional diesel-electric vessels, the SSN-AUKUS design necessitates handling facilities, security perimeters, and specialized workshops. These must comply with nuclear safety regulations that exceed any standard currently active in the Australian commercial or defense sectors. Moreover, the partnership between ASC and BAE systems indicates a heavy reliance on the transfer of institutional knowledge from the United Kingdom. This creates a dependency. The pace of progress at Osborne becomes inextricably linked to the design maturity and technical workforce availability in Barrow-in-Furness. Any delay in the United Kingdom regarding the SSN-AUKUS design phase will inevitably cascade into the construction schedule in South Australia. This remains true regardless of how much concrete has been poured at Osborne. A critical constraint emerging from this investment is the disparity between financial liquidity and human capital availability. While the government can authorize 3.9 billion Australian dollars with a legislative stroke, it cannot legislate the existence of the estimated 4,000 to 5,500 highly skilled workers required to staff the facility by the late 2000s. The challenge is not merely numerical, but qualitative. Specific welding certifications, nuclear safety protocols, and systems integration skills are currently scarce within the domestic labor market. The defense sector is effectively entering a direct competition for talent with the resource and energy sectors, particularly in Western Australia and Queensland. If the mining sector experiences a boom cycle concurrent with the peak construction phase at Osborne, the cost of labor may rise significantly. This introduces a risk where the budget estimates underpinning the current 3.9 billion figure could face pressure. It creates a scenario where the infrastructure is built, but the workforce to utilize it remains under strength, or relies heavily on expensive contracted labor from overseas. From a capability structuring perspective, this massive capital injection highlights a significant opportunity cost dilemma. The defense budget is a finite resource. Prioritizing long-term nuclear submarine infrastructure implicitly accepts a period of risk in the near term. The $3.9 billion is focused on a capability that will not deliver an operational effect until the early 2040s. In the interim, the Royal Australian Navy faces the declining availability of the Collins class, and the uncertainty of the transition period involving the acquisition of Virginia-class vessels from the United States. Critics might suggest that such significant capital could have been allocated to asymmetric assets with shorter acquisition cycles. By burying this capital in infrastructure, the defense strategy appears to bet heavily on the assumption that a high-intensity conflict will not occur during the vulnerable transition window. Furthermore, the rigorous security requirements attached to this infrastructure investment reinforce the depth of integration with the United States and the United Kingdom. The construction of a nuclear-certified yard necessitates security zones and information control regimes. These effectively turn Osborne into an extension of the American and British nuclear industrial complex. This raises questions about operational sovereignty. While the facility is on Australian soil and funded by Australian dollars, the intellectual property and technical certifications governing its operation remain under foreign control. This dynamic suggests that while Australia will own the hardware, the ability to modify, sustain, or even operate the facility independently is severely constrained. The logistical and environmental implications of the Osborne expansion also present a systemic challenge. Dealing with low-level radioactive waste and ensuring the integrity of the reactor handling facilities requires a regulatory framework that is still in development. This highlights the nonlinear nature of defense capability generation. Concrete, legislation, and workforce training must align perfectly to avoid expensive delays. In examining the broader strategic picture, this investment cements the Royal Australian Navy's shift away from a continental defense posture toward a forward projection maritime strategy. A yard designed for nuclear attack submarines is inherently a facility designed for power projection assets capable of operating far from Australian shores. This indicates a tacit acceptance within the defense establishment that the security of Australia is determined by the balance of power in the wider Indo-Pacific rather than the immediate littoral waters. The infrastructure at Osborne is therefore not just a construction site. It is a geopolitical signal that Australia intends to maintain a Tier 1 maritime capability, regardless of the exorbitant entry costs. Ultimately, the $3.9 billion down payment serves as a stress test for the entire Australian defense ecosystem. It forces the industrial base to upgrade its quality standards. It compels the education sector to realign with nuclear engineering requirements. And it mandates a level of project management discipline that has been historically elusive in major defense acquisitions. The success of this endeavor depends less on the funding itself and more on the ability of the Department of Defense to manage the complex interdependencies between international partners, domestic unions, and regulatory bodies. The risk remains that the infrastructure could be completed on time, while the vessel design or the workforce lags behind, resulting in a world-class facility waiting for a purpose. This investment is a necessary condition for the nuclear submarine pathway, but it is far from a sufficient one, and it significantly raises the stakes for every subsequent decision in the AUKUS program.